Hello, good friends, and welcome back to the Bill Press Pod. You know, it's hard to keep track of all the damage Donald Trump has already done in just 8 months. Last week, we talked about the way he's destroyed the Justice Department, turning it into his own private police force to go after his political opponents. This week, we focus on the environment, where Donald Trump has systematically moved to kill almost every regulation adopted since Richard Nixon to protect clean air and clean water, where he's overturned all the progress made under Presidents Obama and Biden in fighting climate change, and where he's shut down new projects creating thousands of new green jobs, even in red states. Only 8 months in, and Donald Trump's already racked up the worst environmental record of any president. So how bad is it, and can we ever recover? Two of many questions for today's guest, Elizabeth Kolbert, America's leading environmental journalist, staff writer for the New Yorker, and author of many books on the environment, including The Sixth Extinction, for which she won the Pulitzer Prize. Elizabeth Kolbert, it's a real honor to welcome you to the Bill Press Pod. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I've been a big fan of yours for a long time and delighted to finally get a chance to talk to you. So I want to start out with a little personal story. Last month, I was on the beach in the Atlantic in Rhode Island, and I saw these barges going up north with these huge cranes on them. I couldn't figure out what the hell was that. I asked a couple of locals, and they said these were the big cranes that installed the wind turbines for the new Revolution Wind offshore project off the coast of Rhode Island. There to provide 80% complete already to provide electricity for Rhode Island and Connecticut. That project has now been 80% complete, stopped dead in its tracks by Donald Trump. What's the impact of that?
The Trump administration has just gone after the wind industry in particular, but wind and solar, hammer and tong, as they say. It has really tried to cripple these industries, which were, you could argue, I think, just on the verge of really have taken off in the US, and offshore wind was the next big frontier. There's a lot of energy to be had in offshore wind. There's a lot of offshore wind in other parts of the world, China and in Europe. And the US was just getting going on that front. We're laggards. And the administration has really done its utmost to cripple those industries. And it's going to have pretty dramatic and, in my opinion, universally unfortunate results.
And, you know, the claims that the president makes about wind, right? It causes cancer. Wind energy causes cancer, hard to follow. Kills
Yeah,
kills birds. I'm sure it
yeah.
does kill some birds, and the wind doesn't always blow all the time. So it's and he makes similar claims about solar energy. The sun isn't always shining.
That's hardly a revelation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
People did think of that before Donald Trump. Yeah. No, it's all, look, we're a country now where the most basic public health advance of the 20th century, vaccines, are under fire. So we are obviously not a country dealing with facts at this point. To go down your list one by one, do wind turbines cause cancer? That is just evidently ridiculous. I would like someone to point me to one bit of evidence of that. Are birds killed by wind turbines? Doubtless, as you say, some are, but the impact of unchecked climate change on avian populations, not to mention all other animal and human populations, I
Mm.
think just that any scientific study would suggest they're way more serious. What's the third? Oh, that the wind doesn't blow all the time. One of the things about offshore wind is actually the wind does blow almost all the time. So that's an exact opposite reason to stop a wind project that's almost fully completed. It would be a reason to really promote offshore wind. And
Right.
obviously, grid integration, these are questions that absolutely demand attention and demand planning and thought. But the answer is not to just say, we're not going to do any of it. Obviously, these things are doable. Many countries are doing them.
As you pointed out, it seemed to me that we were like on the threshold of wind and solar really taking off and becoming a major part of America's energy sources, right?
There was the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 was a very conscious
Yep.
and well-funded and intelligent way of trying to promote clean energy. That's really what it was. It was called the Inflation Reduction Act for various reasons, but it was at its heart an effort to promote clean energy, which I should say is in many instances the cheapest form of energy that you can put up these days. Those industries really were poised for takeoff. And there was a lot of gearing up. And one of the many tragedies of what's going on right now, and you alluded to it when you talked about those huge barges that you saw going by, you do need a lot of infrastructure. It takes a while to build that infrastructure to get these enormous wind turbines into
Hmm.
the water. And those were being built. They were all in the process of getting going. And they were going to provide actually a lot of jobs. And now, if you just cut that off, then the next administration, if and when we have one, is going to have to start all over again. So there's just a tremendous amount of wasted effort that has now just laid waste to countless man hours worth of effort.
In fact, that bill included $369 billion for climate and clean energy investments, many of them, Elizabeth, in red states, right? Not just blue states.
Yeah, absolutely. The majority of that spending was going to go. There was a big push, and one of the many ironies here, or tragic ironies here, is that those were manufacturing jobs. A lot of the money in
Hmm.
the Inflation Reduction Act was supposed to go toward clean energy manufacturing, so battery, electric car. A bunch of that money did get spent, as it were, and you do have factories going up now, even as we speak. And the sort of political one of the political calculuses behind that was, well, we're going to make clean energy part and clean energy manufacturing part of the fabric of our economy, and then we'll stop having these ridiculous arguments about whether we need to be doing this or not. It would just be something that is makes sense both for in terms of climate change, makes sense in terms of the economy, and everyone will come to that realization. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to have happened. We seem to be in a situation where certain kinds of culture wars, or whatever you want to call them, trump, and I use that term advisedly, even people's actual economic interests, which is scholars will be studying this for generations.
How would you describe the contribution that President Joe Biden made to the climate change issue?
I don't know that people would give Joe Biden credit for that, but it was certainly something that he pushed forward and signed and was an
Hmm.
advocate for. And the Biden administration came in, the first Trump administration had tried to unravel everything that the Obama administration had done. So we have been in this seesawing
Yeah,
world of climate policy now for many years. It's been extremely damaging to the clean industry in energy industry. These are projects, once again, you saw the size that of the infrastructure that's needed to put up some of these projects, and you can't do that overnight. So every time you reverse yourself, you set things back, not just by one administration, but maybe by several. So that's what's so sad
right.
about this.
That Trump 1 tried to undo everything President Obama had done. Trump 2 is trying to undo, with a lot of success, everything Joe Biden accomplished as well. Starting with Elizabeth, day one, signing an executive order. I was going to ask you about a few things that Trump has done to undo. One, day one, signing an executive order, taking the United States out of the Paris agreements.
Yeah, this is something that he did last time around too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's the impact of that for the United States? Do people take us seriously on the issue of climate change with the seesaw effect?
No, I don't think they do. The one thing that the United States has always had is deep pockets. And so when the United States enters into these conversations, it can, and a certain amount of just global power. So when the US has tried to move things forward in terms of international negotiations, it still does have an impact, or it did. Now, Trump is in so many ways, and here I'm getting slightly outside of my purview, I guess. Trump has in so many ways tried to isolate the US and undermine its credibility overseas. It's very hard to see how we will recover that.
Mhm. He also, I think that first day, or if not soon after, signed an executive order declaring a national emergency energy and saying we had to increase the production of fossil fuels and dependency on fossil fuels. Basically, it's a big U-turn for all the federal agencies, right? To go from weaning ourselves away from fossil fuels to making them number one again.
Well, no, absolutely. If you look at what this administration has done, it is basically, you could say this was everything they've done has, they received it in a memo from the fossil fuel industry, and they're just carrying it out. And it is to try to basically fend off any kind of competition for fossil fuels and to lock in as much fossil fuel infrastructure as possible. And
Yeah.
that is at a moment when we truly are facing potential global climate catastrophe, the absolute last thing we need.
Electric vehicles taking off again, maybe leading the industry, everybody moving in that direction, including Cadillac. And then suddenly the $7,500 tax credit is gone. And does the electric vehicles survive?
I think once again, these are all the point that I think people would make, and I just saw a figure today about energy investment around the world. Still, solar and wind, their investment in solar and wind is way up in the first 6 months of 2025, even despite what the Trump
Wow,
administration has done.
interesting.
So,
Yeah.
around the world, these things are taking off. And I think the point that people would make, and it's a pretty basic point, is the Chinese are going to capture much of the
Mm.
world market in electric vehicles. Europe is certainly turning towards electric vehicles. There are just so many reasons to be turning towards electric vehicles, and they're going to make cheap and efficient electric vehicles. And the US car manufacturers, even they realize that, and they realize that they are going to have this the only market that's going to be left is the US. And that's not a good position even they want to be in.
And then Donald Trump again is saying we've got to get back to coal.
Yeah, it
He
would be
tr-
laughable. Yeah.
it is left like I remember in Trump one, right? He was going to say we're bringing back coal. How did that go? And he's
Yeah.
beating this drum. Oh,
The
sorry.
problem is no, the problem is that there are a certain number of coal plants still in operation in the US. I can't give
Aha.
you an
Yeah.
exact figure. And as energy demand ramps up for a variety of reasons, including AI, we do need more electricity. And the that electricity should be coming, obviously, from clean energy sources, but increasingly you're going to see coal plants stay open, and you are also going to see, and this is almost as bad or maybe in some ways worse because they will be new plants. You're going to see people putting up gas, so natural gas plants, and that is once again that is just everyone would agree who has studied this issue and looked at the consequences of climate change, which we are increasingly seeing all around us. We really can't be building new fossil fuel burning plants. That's just a stupid idea. So every coal plant that stays open and every natural gas plant that gets opened is one more nail in the proverbial coffin.
And finally, in terms of attempts to roll back the clock, I've seen this referred to as the holy grail of the whole environmental movement or the clean energy movement, if you will. 2009 finding by the EPA that under the Clean Air Act, it had the authority to regulate greenhouse gases. Just so all of our listeners know, I know the Supreme Court upheld that authority of the EPA by a 5-4 decision. And the Trump administration has moved the new director of the EPA to undo that and say, no, we don't have that authority anymore. That kind of undercuts the entire movement, doesn't it?
It goes even a little bit further than that. This is a point, and it's slightly technical, but at its heart is what's called the endangerment finding. And under the Clean Air Act, if a pollutant is deemed to pose a danger to the public, then the EPA has to
Ah,
regulate it. So what the Trump administration is saying, so once the Obama administration did issue what was called the endangerment finding, that really led the EPA to have to take action under the Clean Air Act. And I'm not going to go into the many ins and outs that this has had since then. That happened in 2009, administration to administration. But Trump 1 just tried to roll back Obama administration regulations without going after this fundamental finding, which
right.
many people thought that is because it would be impossible to argue that climate change didn't pose a threat to the public health. But now, and I think it is a sign of how truly radical they are and how, completely willing they are to go against the scientific understanding, they are planning to try to roll back that endangerment finding. Now that will also be litigated, but I believe that their hope slash belief is we have a new Supreme Court. You mentioned it was a 5-4 decision. We have a new Supreme Court. Maybe we can get away with it this time.
Yeah. And they have succeeded in doing that, and it would certainly be challenged. We'll see how that works. You have referred a couple of times to the reality, ever more visible reality of climate change and its impact on the world. Elizabeth, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'd like you to tell us how bad you think things are now, what's the status quo, and what the prospects are for some maybe reversing our policies and getting back to taking climate change seriously. Here on the Bill Press Pod, we'll take a quick break, then we'll come back and continue our conversation with Elizabeth Kolbert. Friends, speaking of the environment, there are a lot of environmental organizations that deserve our support, but I want to mention one of my favorites, the League of Conservation Voters, which I've supported since it was created. In fact, for a while, I served on the board of directors of the California chapter of the League of Conservation Voters. One of the reasons I like the League of Conservation Voters is because they're a political organization. They don't just talk about ideas, they work hard, they fight hard to get things done. They're on the front lines lobbying members of Congress and supporting candidates who are all for the environment and tossing out candidates who vote against the environment. So I encourage you to join the fight. Join the fight versus Trump's war that he's launched against the environment. Join the fight by checking out the League of Conservation Voters. Their website, lcv.org. lcv.org. And we're back. Welcome back to today's podcast. So delighted to welcome as our guest Elizabeth Kolbert, a longtime fan. I consider you, Elizabeth, the Rachel Carlson of our day, who are warning us about the environment, dangers to the environment, and no more stronger or prophetic voice, I believe, on the environment and climate change than you're writing in the New Yorker magazine. You're also a visiting fellow at Williams College, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for your book, the one of several books, The Sixth Extinction. Welcome back. What is the status, if someone asks you today, where do we stand now with climate change? How serious is the threat?
I think we're in it's hard to overstate the seriousness of the situation. And I think that the thing that people really need to understand, first of all, we are seeing all sorts of impacts of climate change practically every day or certainly every week. The recent flooding in Texas was definitely supercharged by climate change. We just had the Hurricane Erin, which did not make landfall, but which exploded very fast. That's definitely a climate change signal. These hurricanes that go from category 1 to category 5 in a very short amount of time. So we are seeing the fingerprints of climate change on a lot of these extreme weather events, really all of them. And this is what's happening with the climate that we have now. And every day that we continue to pour CO2 into the atmosphere, we are guaranteeing that much more warming is going to come at the end of this. And so you have to imagine it's not just the climate of today is the problem. The climate is going to be perpetually changing, basically, until we stabilize CO2 in the atmosphere, which we are nowhere near doing. So it's a very serious situation.
We're seeing the impact, as you point out, in the extreme weather conditions. Are we seeing it also in changes in agriculture and crops yet?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're seeing is big global drying out. That is one of the sort of fingerprints or handprints of climate change. You just get a lot more evaporation when you get higher temperatures, and a lot of regions of the world, and this is extremely well documented, are drying out. And we see water crises erupting in various cities. And then, sometimes they pass, they get rain, but the general trend of things drying out is definitely a serious trend. And we're seeing that in the American Southwest. We're seeing all these fights about the Colorado River. Those are not going to go away. We're seeing the Great Salt Lake, which is not a source of fresh water, but we're seeing that drying up. And part of that is diverting water that should be going into the lake, and part of that is evaporation from the lake. There recently been a spate of stories about areas of Central Europe that are now getting so dry that they're no longer suitable for farming. People have been farming there for thousands of years. So we are seeing areas of the world that are becoming less and less suitable for agriculture, and that in the kind of world we live in, where it would be fine, or it might be fine, if everyone could just get up and move, but we don't live in that kind of a world. We live in a kind of world where we have certain patterns, relatively stable weather patterns that we've had for many generations, and the world has grown up around that. And you have to imagine a world that can't rely on that anymore.
How about rising sea levels? I know we see some flooding in Miami even when there's not a storm, right? Almost as a matter of course these days, but signs of that around the world as well?
Oh, absolutely. Sea level rise is absolutely occurring, and anyone who lives near a coast probably can attest to that. The number of times their basement gets flooded is just going up in Florida. Places that don't have basements because the water table is too high, as you point out, there's just sunny day flooding. So many cities around the world are debating whether they have to put up seawalls, dikes,
Mm.
barriers. Another problem that we have is that a certain amount of sea level rise is simply locked in at this point, because the warmer the oceans get, the more space they take up. Warmer water just takes up more space. And a certain amount we still have discretion over, were we to mend our ways, because we're also at the point of potentially melting off big chunks of the world's two remaining major ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica. And one trend that people should be aware of is that sea levels aren't just rising, but sea level rise is accelerating.
What I don't understand, maybe nobody can, maybe you can help explain. The evidence is obvious, right? It is so overwhelming that the reality is just undeniable, I believe. The scientists are, what, 99.9%
Yeah,
agree, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so, how can people deny it and yet still call it a hoax and refuse to take necessary steps in terms of saving the planet, right, or our population? What's
Well,
behind that?
yeah, I also have spent a long time thinking about this, and
I know.
I don't have a great answer, but I think that when I see these debates playing out, to go back to vaccines, which are, as I say, have saved millions and millions of lives, all of these childhood diseases that used to kill kids, infants, and toddlers, that we've more or less eliminated. And when I see that we are now in some weird haze where we've just forgotten that and have decided vaccines are the problem, you realize that it's really depending on people to make logical connections. It just doesn't seem to be a winning strategy these days.
No, and I think, you're compounding the problem are the many thousands of employees here getting back to the United States who have been fired, working at NOAA, working in the Forest Service, working in the Weather Service, working at the National Science Foundation, who are dealing with these issues, no longer have their jobs because suddenly
Yeah,
climate change is woke, so we
yeah,
can't have any
yeah.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really terrifying. Definitely one of the administration's tactics is the less we hear about this, the less information there is, the better. So a lot of websites have gone dark. as you say, a lot of programs have been just cut. There's something called the National Climate Assessment, which is a congressionally mandated report. It has to come out according to the law, which is increasingly seen as optional these days. And one is in the works, I believe, for 2027. And the administration just disbanded it. Now, some universities and many people are volunteering their time to try to put this out anyway, but that's the sort of thing that's happening to just shut down information. And that is this ostrich-like approach. If we don't measure it, if we don't pay attention to it, it won't hurt us. And we've seen throughout history that hasn't really tended to work.
How about the rest of the world, particularly Western Europe, India, China, whatever? Are they continuing to take serious steps while the United States, at least temporarily, checks out of the game?
Yes, they are, but I do think that the administration, I was just reading a piece the other day about how the administration is pressuring Europe to take more of our fossil fuels,
Oh, yeah.
so they're working very diligently, not just to screw up the future in the United States, but to do it globally. And how that's going to play out, I don't really know, but I do know that a lot of companies, a lot of multinational companies that had signed on to various pledges and various reporting programs are backing away. And from a corporate point of view, anything that you do that ties your hands in any way, often companies want to get out of that.
Yeah. Someday there will be another administration, another president who takes climate change seriously, as Joe Biden and Barack Obama did. How long will it take us to recover, do you believe, to get back on track and doing what the United States is capable of and should be doing in terms of leading the fight against climate change?
There's I could answer that in a couple of different ways. One is clearly years. It takes years to gear up to for the put in the kind of infrastructure we were talking about earlier in the
Hmm.
program. Another level, I could say a generation. You don't get scientists. They're discouraging a lot of people. They're cutting off people's doctoral grants and things like that. You don't train a generation of scientists. You just lose that generation of scientists. And a lot of people are looking for jobs in Europe and things like that. So on another level, the answer is it'll take a generation. And on another level, on a third level, you could say it will take forever because we will have lost this moment. And other people, I hope and believe, will seize the moment. So I think that all of those answers are true on some level.
And I hear you have another book coming out soon. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, it's called Life on a Little Known Planet, and it's a collection of stories from around the world and on different topics, but about our rapidly changing world. Some of them are involve the natural world, and some involve the human world.
Life on a Little Known Planet. Very good. We look forward to the release of the book and talking to you about the book. And that's it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, a great big thank you to Elizabeth Kolbert. Her work is great. You see her in the New Yorker, see her in the New York Review of Books, and she has a new book coming out, as we discussed, which we'll be talking with her about as soon as that hits the bookstores. Meanwhile, this is a big week. Congress comes back this week, facing yet the possibility of yet another government shutdown. Can you believe it? The White House is saying that maybe he'll be sending federal troops to Chicago by the end of the week. But the big story of the week is going to be on Wednesday, where there's going to be a news conference on the steps of the Capitol. Two members of Congress, Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, Ro Khanna from California, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who are going to be introducing to the media victims of Jeffrey Epstein, who are going to tell their story and possibly even name names. That is going to blow the Epstein matter up all over again. And you know it's going to drive Donald Trump crazy. So watch the news this week and then come back on Friday for our Reporters Roundtable. Well, we'll try to wrap it all up and make some sense of it all. Have a great week. We'll see you on Friday with the next edition of the Bill Press Pod, our Reporters Roundtable.